read enough will find that they have books that they'll return to again and again over the years. One of those for me is called Cold Comfort, Life at the Top of the Map by Bart Sutter. The reason that I enjoy this story, or actually it's not a story, it's a collection of essays, is for multiple reasons. One, it's a collection of essays about my hometown, or maybe not my hometown, but close enough to where I grew up that it brings into elements of the heart. It brings into play items that are close to things that I remember in my mind because of where I grew up and what he's describing. Play the setting that these essays are about. Another reason is that the author Bart Sutter was a teacher of English at the college I attended back when this was written, when he wrote this in the late 90s, I believe. He was there. I never had a chance after, and I didn't discover the book until later on in life. I had no idea that he had written a book, when he was a teacher there. And I was able to pick it up later, read it, and was like, oh, cool, he wrote that book, and I was like, oh, I wish now, having read the book, I wish, when I first discovered it, I was like, oh, I wish I would have had, taken a couple classes from him at least. But how college goes is you take what you can when you need it. So the story of the background of the book for me was my family returned to this area where I grew up back in 2010, and when we first returned, we were living with my folks until we found a place to stay on our own. And my parents had this old farmhouse. Well, it wasn't a farmhouse. It was a farmhouse, but it was now set in the suburbs of the metropolitan area where we are. And the house was probably built in, I don't know, maybe the 20s or 30s, so it's getting on to 100 years old now, but all around it was modern houses. So I think it might have been a farmhouse way back, when that area was still farmland. Anyway, they had this old house that they lived in, and so up in the upper kind of attic section, it was more of like this walk-in attic where we stayed when we lived there with them. My mom had a bookcase up there, and just filled with kind of random books. And I was looking through them one day, and I pulled it out, and I looked at it. I was like, "Hey, look, it's by Bart Sutter." I was like, that was my first like kind of aha moment. I opened the cover, and my brother's name actually is written in the cover, in my mom's handwriting, which is odd. I suppose that he had purchased the book at some point, and my mom wanted to indicate that he was the owner or something. So my brother's name is in there, but then on the covered up by the fly is another random item written in there by who knows who from who knows when. Well, in this case, maybe we do know when. It says, Vern, happy birthday 2000, Larry. And it's kind of one of my favorite elements of older books you might find, where someone has written in there a note. It's kind of like the collection of stories by Joseph Conrad, what's written in there, and it adds a personal touch, personal element to the book. I mean, I don't know who Vern was, I don't know who Larry was, but at the time, Larry, and this was I assume Larry wrote this in the year 2000, which is just a couple years after the book was published. Larry, I don't know, maybe he knew Bart Sutter, or maybe It was an interesting book that Larry saw, and he's like, hey, this would be a good gift for Vern. It's a story. There's a story there behind that, what was written in there. And it's one of my favorite things to have in older copies of books. Those personal touches that it makes you know that the book was special to somebody at some point. Vern received it for his birthday. It's too bad Vern didn't keep the book. I don't know why he didn't keep it, but now it's in my hands. It was my brother's, and to tell you the truth, I never told my brother that I was going to take the book. It was at my mom's house. I guess he didn't want it. Here I am trying to justify, why I have the book now. But no, he lived overseas at the time, I believe. So my mom had probably some of his items, some of his things. I should tell him though that I have his book in case he wants it back. Although it's, I enjoy the book. I like to reread it, like I was mentioning. So I picked it up and I read it and it was like, this is great. It's just, in reading through it, it was a joy because of the setting of the essays. These essays were written about the place where I grew up, and to read about those places now, having left that place, I don't live there anymore. But having left that place, and I'm able to visit, periodically. We just visited a couple days ago, actually. To visit and brings back all of the memories and the feelings of the heart. And it's just the same way that the stories, the essays, reading through the essays do. They're not fiction, they are historical, or I shouldn't say historical, they're commentary on elements of the place. I just wanted to look at some of the pages I jotted down of my favorite references in the book. The first one is, maybe what I should do is I should read through the essay titles so you get an idea, a feel for what the collection is about. And if you know this area, maybe I'll try to avoid saying what this area is unless I read it specifically in the book. I'll try to avoid saying it, and then maybe you can kind of clue yourselves into, well, where might this be? The book is divided into two different sections. The first one's called One Lopsided City, and the next one is called Roundabout. And I'll just read the headings of a few of these. First is A City Upon a Hill, The Bridge, Park Point, Sister City, Tisher Creek, Ghost of a Good Bad Man, Barber Poles, Hawk Ridge, The Season of Death, Disorganized Hockey, The History of Snow, A Christmas Card, and Finlandia at 14 Below. And that was the first section, or the first part of the book, One Lopsided City. And then in Roundabout, the headings, or the essays are, some of the essays are Cross Country, The Overcoat. I enjoyed that one. God's Own Ice Rink, The Best Next Thing to Nobody, Family Car Camping, The Duluth Behind Duluth, Blueberry Country, Lake Addiction, and then the last epilogue is called The Back Road to Ely. So now that I've read through those headings, I'm going to quote some of the things that I enjoyed, some of the passages I enjoyed in the book from the different ones. This one is an essay that I did not mention. It's called God, and I guess I'll explain that the author at the time, I don't know where he's at now, but the author at the time was more of an agnostic. He in the book, he brings a lot of his family history into play, not a lot, but enough that you kind of get a feel for who he is and what he was like. Because when anyone writing types of essays like this, you get a feel for their thought patterns and their personality. So anyway, I'll read this passage from God. One of the many pleasures of living in Duluth is that you have to look at the lake a lot. You might only mean to go get some groceries or a hammer from the hardware store, but on your way you see something so grand, so terrible and beautiful, that you absorb your daily requirement of humility just by driving down the street. I've also found that the sight of Lake Superior works very well to shock me out of my self-pity, a state of mindlessness to which I seem to be especially prone. I was deep in such a funk one night when I finally realized that the lake was God. So again, I highlight that because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to drive in Duluth and to see the lake. It's just in random places. For example, like I mentioned, we've just been there a few days ago, and we stopped at the grocery store, and this was on Superior Street, and just above where the Rose Garden is, if you know where that is. And from that vantage point, you can see out across the lake, and it's a random thing. You're just there to get groceries. We were there to buy some lunch meat for lunch, and you're walking into the grocery store, and you can just look over, and there's the lake. It is something. The next one is another passage from sorry, I just noticed something. Okay, I'll come back to it. This is from a passage from another one that I did not read, called April Fools. And in April Fools, he's talking about winter stays so long in Duluth. What can you do to kind of get yourself out of the funk of being in winter and knowing that others are probably enjoying spring? Spring has come for others, but you're still locked in the frigid Arctic up in Duluth at that time of year. One of the items he mentions that you could do is you can drive to Hinckley to see if the trees have budded out down there. And even if they haven't, you can get a caramel roll out of the deal. And that's all he says. For those of us who've been through Hinckley, we know what he's talking about. And I'll leave it at that. But that's all he leaves it at. But for those of us who have lived around here enough, we know what he's talking about as far as caramel rolls go. So I jotted that down because that was interesting. Now, one I did not jot down, but I need to mention is, let's see. I'm just going to go back. This is from Sister City. And Sister City is I mentioned that I grew up in the area. I grew up in Duluth, Sister City. And there's a passage in the story, in the essay Sister City. It says, talking about a setting in the Sister City. These are the friendliest taverns on earth, dangerous and warm, where the denizens sit hunched around their hearts, which hurt from life at 12 below zero, from gazing all day at the glittering hills of Duluth. So there's a couple elements in there. Sister City was it's kind of like I don't know, kind of like a hard, an awkward relationship, or a relationship in which the sisters are constantly butting heads, or maybe not getting along very well. But in reality, they do. They're sisters whether they like it or not, and they have to get along. But that is to say, though, too, that there's some personality traits and characteristics of one sister that the other sister might frown upon, or one might look down upon or be envious of, something like that. But the passage or the reference in that passage is the denizens sitting around with their hearts hurting from life at 12 below zero. The 12 below zero is actually a reference to a collection of short stories that was written by a fellow professor at the college where I was at the time. Dr. Tony Bukowski wrote a collection of fiction work called 12 Below Zero. He's written several other collections as well. He was an author of short fiction like that, and what Tony did was he wrote into his fiction. Most of the setting of his fiction is in that sister city, especially in the east end of that sister city. And the Polish immigrants that lived there, probably back, I'm thinking, a lot of his writing is set back in the, maybe the 60s, 70s, 50s, maybe even, of the east end of the sister city. So he knows, he grew up there, I'm sure he did, if I remember correctly. He grew up there as well. He knows what his life was like at that time. So he writes his characters are the people of that time frame and that setting. And 12 Below Zero is a collection of his short stories. So I admired that that Bart Sutter wrote that into that essay. The next one is from The Ghost of a Good Bad Man, and it's not really anything that is kind of historically grounded in this sentence. It's just a sentence. It says, "Here I made friends with the man in the mirror who had watched me with such concern through the years." And I just like that image, as though the man in the mirror is someone else. It's another person that you kind of live your life with. And one instance, maybe you can say that's true because you see yourself, especially in terms of growing through the years as you age. You look at the man in the mirror, and he looks back at you, and he, in one respect, you can, if you use your creativity, you can think, what does he think of me? Does he like who I am? Or vice versa, do I like who he is? Do I like the person I see? And I enjoyed that sentence because you put it in that creative terms, that it's like a split. It's one person. It's a person divided into two, and you're looking at each other and you're trying to determine, if trying to see each other's faults maybe, or also not just faults, but you're also seeing, in a sense of pride, you're seeing what you admire about yourself, about that other person that you see there. So it brings into mind a lot of different ideas that you can come up with in terms of who that person is that you're seeing in the mirror. Next one. Again, just a brief comment that I found interesting. Not something that's maybe specific to the area, but just a sentence I enjoyed. It says, "The barbershop remains one of the last bastions of male society." I'll just leave it at that. It's been ages since I've been to a barbershop, but I'll just leave it at that. Next passage is from The Season of Death, and it's a paragraph that I want to read, but I did underline a sentence in that paragraph. This is the season of death. The signs are everywhere. The scent of wood smoke is its perfume, and so is the aroma of exhausted leaves. I wonder why, when I'm moving right along through middle life, why don't I mind being reminded of my mortality every which way I look? Time is obviously running out, and I'm haunted by what I've lost, by all that I've failed to accomplish. After all these years, I still don't have a respectable job, or a pension plan, or health insurance. I ought to be depressed, and I am. But still, I walk the streets of my neighborhood, kicking the leaves up to my ankles in nature's confetti, feeling half crazy with happiness. The dead leaves resemble the garish currency of some small foreign country, and I've actually caught myself thinking, this is my money. I guess I enjoy that passage because it's not until you get older that you start slowing down, you start appreciating the smaller things in life, the tangible things in life. You know, in this case, like walking along in the fall time and you're walking through the dead leaves. I guess in that picture, I can see myself as a kid playing in the leaves that we've raked up in the fall. I can see my own children playing in leaves that they've raked up in the fall. But in that element, there's an element of fun. You know, as a child, you're constantly looking for what's fun. You know, what's fun about life. But in this setting, you know, I don't know, you know, if Bart made this up or if he actually found himself doing this. You know, it's not a fun task. He's just walking down the street probably, and yet he's capturing that image in his mind. You know, this is a thing that's making me happy, to be able to walk down the street with this in these leaves, to see them rustling about as I walk, and my feet are kicking them up. That's why I like that passage, because it is something that's different about, you know, when you get older and you appreciate those images more. Might not have anything specific to do with the setting, you know, where this is set, but because you could do this in many different places. But it's there's one thing I think I see a lot in this book is his connection with maybe not just the place in the world this is set, but in appreciating life as you have it, you know, what you have, where you have it at the time. A couple passages from the next one, the overcoat, which I mentioned is one of my favorite ones. These are paragraphs again. Actually, for this paragraph, I'll back up a little bit to get a bearing on where we're at. I won't back up too far. He tells a story about his wife and himself being in Dublin, and they are shopping about the shops there, and says there on the sidewalk there was a woman selling oranges. The odd thing about it was the small sort of weirdness that you see in Ireland so often. I don't know about that, but the odd thing was she was selling them out of a baby buggy. She had a baby buggy piled high with oranges, and there in that wet weather, the oranges absolutely blazed. I wish I'd bought one of those oranges. I've thought of them so often since. But I was preoccupied with a far greater strangeness. As I strode down the glistening street in my new overcoat, so he bought an overcoat at one of these shops, I was feeling unreasonably happy, elevated somehow and transformed. This peculiar gladness had come over me the minute I'd put on the overcoat inside the store. It wasn't dissipating either, but growing more intense. Suddenly I understood I had become my father. And to skip ahead to the next one I highlighted. I don't guess anyone can see how strange I feel when I put on my overcoat. I look fairly ordinary, a middle-aged, middle-class guy who's going gray. But it feels extraordinary to exit a theater, say, and help my wife into her coat and shrug into my own. As I fumble with my buttons, I'm apt to think of my own father, who has Alzheimer's now, and who can't find the sleeve of his coat to fasten the buttons himself. I see I have his hands. I'm surprised by my new wedding band and wonder, who's this woman in the deep red coat who smiles at me with wrinkles around her eyes? And who am I wonder, as I stand here in my overcoat? We could be characters in a play. She seems to know me, though, and so I offer her my arm, and we walk out into the great and grand overwhelming night that is our life. So, I think that's the last paragraph of this essay. That's one reason I enjoyed this essay most. Especially as, as I get older, I think about my own father. He's much older now than when I was a kid. I'm glad that he's still around. He does not have Alzheimer's, so that's also good. To be able to have a dad that you can still interact with and still relate to, and you look at him, and as you age, especially with kids, as you see yourself interacting with your own kids, you see how you're almost making comparisons against, how did my dad do it when he was my age and I was his son or child that he was raising. You think back about those things and you compare it against what you're doing now. So the elements that he brought in about that familiar items, it was a joy to read this essay for me, and then just to put it, for him to draw that image again. Those other images we saw, like the man in the mirror, and just the phrases that he adds into to bring background into the story. That's some of the other items and elements that I liked about this book. The image of him being a character in a play and living life with his wife. She smiles at him and she seems to know me. It's really creative writing, I think, to put it in those terms. It's writing that I wish I would be capable of doing. Then the last one that I jotted down, I believe, is in the epilogue, The Back Road to Ely. Again, it's just a short sentence, but it kind of encapsulates what I mentioned before about taking time to slow down and appreciate what you see in your life, the things that you have in your life, where you are living. You don't have to live in the setting that this book is set in. Maybe you're somewhere totally different, but that's the beauty of growing up in a place, especially if you have a great childhood and that place gets ingrained in. Well, maybe even if you don't have a great childhood, places that you grow up get ingrained within you, and maybe you have fond memories of the places, maybe you don't, but it's still ingrained in you. You still remember those places, and when they are happy, it is a pleasure to remember those places and to think about them and to visit them, like we recently did. And what he says in the Back Road to Ely is, the brain insists on novelty, constant stimulation, but the soul desires the same old thing, renewed again and again. That's why I moved to Duluth 10 years ago, to lose myself repeatedly in the woods and water of canoe country, to give myself some history here, to lay down layer upon layer of experience in the same old, always different place. I didn't underline all of that, but it kept going because I found that was important too. So that's probably why it's a joy to me to read this book over. I try to read at least every couple of years, maybe. Especially if I haven't been back to my place where I grew up. But it's to reread it and to read passages about the place that's special to me, about the place that gets ingrained into you because you grew up there, and because I did enjoy it. I enjoyed growing up there, and enjoying that to reread through essays about that place is. And almost to use his words at the end there, it almost is something that's important to the soul. It's important to revisit those places and to refresh your. What did he say there? To lay down layer upon layer of experience in the same old, always different place. The soul desires the same old thing, renewed again and again. And it's true, it is. When I read through this and I have such a draw to the things he's saying in the book, then I know it's true. Thank you for watching.